Hey, probably we should get started. Thanks everyone for joining this morning session, and welcome back for the second day. My name is Larry Liu. It's my great privilege to chair this session, and this session focuses on China's role in global resources and the global goods, growing goods market. And we have three excellent speakers, and each speaker will have 15 minutes, and then in the end we have 15 minutes for questions and for Q&A. Let me first introduce our first speaker, Professor Sheng. Professor Sheng is the corporate chair in agricultural economics at corporate school here, and he was the former vice president of the Asian Society of Agricultural Economics, and also the president of Eastern Asian branch of AARES. What is that? What does it represent? Six. And Professor Shen also obtained a PhD from ANU. Over to you, Professor Shen, please.
Thank you, Larry. It's my great honor actually getting back to representing Crawford School to give the talk at China Update. So again, welcome back to the second day's session. So yesterday we heard quite a lot about talking energy transition in China, but most of the topics actually focus on the economy as a whole. There is an important area need to be focused, which is about agriculture and rural sector. So today, I'm going to talking about how this rural transformation happened in China by comparing China's, development stage with the rest of the world, and so that to see how we can fit in this energy transition as well as sustainability issue into the whole topic. Now, because I'm only having like 10 to 15 minutes, I'm only cover a little bit a few topics. One is about transition in China's past, determinants, and also I'm going to have the issue from a global perspective. Important in particular, I'm going to point out some particular area that could affect the future economic development and structural transformation in China, and so that gives some policy implications. So everybody knows that China has experienced rapid economic growth. At the same time, actually rural transformation happened quickly. On the one hand, you can see that total grain output increased from like 300 million tons in 1980 to recent years is reaching 682 million tons, which means that around 2% per annum growth, which is twice than the population growth. So this helps to improve the food security the whole country. On the other hand, you can see that at the same time, the agriculture sector also contribute a lot of additional labor to the economic transition, and also fuel the rest of part of the economic growth, in particular support industrialization and urbanization. There are quite a lot of reasons attributed to such a type of miracle achievement. One thing is about institutional reforms. Everybody knows about household responsibility reform, but also you can see that this land capital reforms continue over time. In particular, in the recent 2 years, there is also a lot of discussion about whether China's farmers need another 30 years of tenureship for the land owning. Of course, domestic international market openness plays some role. And I'm sure that yesterday, like Christine and Professor Yao has mentioned a lot of things about that part of things as well. But what I want to, first point it out was that when time goes to, recent years, agriculture sector also facing some slowdown pattern in terms of economic growth. Now, take example that the yield growth in China actually slowed down to less than half of long-term growth. Later, I can show you some of numbers. Of course, there are many reasons behind it, but one important area that we need to highlight is about environmental as well as concern as well as climate change. Here are two figures, give you some general ideas. On one hand, you can see that the mismatch between water and land, which is shown here, in this figure, is very challenging. So making further improving yield is becomes impossible type of thing. On the other hand, you can see, I mean, the agriculture-related pollution actually is also, I mean, becoming a serious problem. Take soil quality as examples. As around 30% of the arable land in China is suffering to some extent type of, I mean, agriculture, I mean, pollution, right? But of course, you can also see that this type of, I mean, constraint on natural resources are also making the climate change becoming another, I mean, important challenge. Okay, so now I'm going to talking about, I mean, how this type of things fit in the whole picture. But before that, let's, I mean, look at, I mean, agriculture or rural transformation as, I mean, how to say, conceptual framework. According to IFAD, as well as other recent literature, you can see rural transformation actually is a very complex process. I mean, which contains two important components. One thing is about agriculture development, which can be measured like agriculture labor productivity growth, high value product, I mean, proportion, and so on and so forth. On the other hand, there is another important pillar is to what extent this agriculture or rural transformation may create off-farm employment, and so that, I mean, contribute to the economic growth for the rest part of the economy. So of course, I mean, all these two dimensions, I mean, give you some general, I mean, information, but the combination of these five stages actually helping people to better understand that in each of the particular stage, these two dimensions play a different role in a way. Now, of course, you know that, I mean, to strategically making use of policy to facilitate this type of transformation along the two dimensions is very important. So institutional reform, public policy, as well as, I mean, public infrastructure investment can play all, I mean, role. And of course, I mean, in the recent study, you can see in different stage of development, I mean, wise design of the policy may help in a country, I mean, achieve a better, I mean, goal in that direction. So if we look at, I mean, that's a analytical framework, we can try to making use of international comparable data to show what happens in China over the past, I mean, 40 years compared to the rest of the world. Now here, these two pictures actually gives you some idea about how agricultural labor productivity grows over the past 40 years compared to the rest of other developing world or developing regions. Of course, the second one actually I'm trying to give you an idea about share of high value, I mean, agriculture products. What you can see here was that, I mean, in particular, between mid-1990s to, I mean, late or mid of 2010, agricultural labor productivity grows up very quickly. Of course, because we're trying to using FAO data, which is using this definition, well, you probably may question about the levels. So, but here we're trying to say, I mean, it's only valuable, I mean, for comparing cross country in the growth rate part of things because of the data availability. And of course, I mean, following this part of, I mean, rapid, I mean, agricultural labor productivity growth, you can also see high value proportion goes up more quickly. This actually trying to distinct, I mean, China's, I mean, development path, I mean, from the rest of other countries. If you look at, I mean, Philippines, Malaysia, and other places, I mean, these also happen, but actually this type of a transition towards high value products doesn't, I mean, necessarily go into that way. Now, if we look at the second dimension, which is, I mean, to what extent off-farm employment has been created, which means that, I mean, more resources using for support agriculture or economic transition, you can see in terms of, I mean, agriculture over, I mean, the total GDP ratio as well as the share for off-farm employment, you can see it goes up, I mean, more quickly in the same period of time. But what happens is more interestingly is that in the recent years, this type of growth rate actually slowed down, well, in both cases. And the next type of things, I mean, before we go into talking about, I mean, what the cause of the recent pattern of the things, let's first, I mean, go to talk about what the drivers. Of course, I mean, in terms of this, I mean, dramatic type of, I mean, economic transformation, TFP or technology progress play much of the important role. So as we just now mentioned, agriculture, how to say, GDP grows at the rate of 5.4% per annum throughout the whole, I mean, 40 years period. Among them, around 60% or 50% are coming from technology progress. So it means over this period of time, 2.6% per annum from TFP growth is there. right? But like what we have already seen here in recent 10 years, the agriculture total factor productivity growth rate, much more slowed down in this pattern, right? This is not just, unique phenomenon for China. Actually, if you look at the global type of phenomenon, in particular for OECD countries, similar type of pattern. Now, one of the big reasons or issue here is that, because agriculture or rural sector is quite different from manufacturing industries, more heavily being affected by global warming, as well as, other environmental factors. So like what we mentioned about land degradation and water shortage, as well as, global warming type of issues, becoming one of the important things that could be an important reason to contributing this type of slowdown. Of course, other literatures also pointed out that the institutional reform take, openness to trade as one of the examples. That China actually moves more quickly between the mid-1990s to, 2010, right? So this actually gives a great motivation for the, rural sector development. But after that, you can see that protection rate goes up a little bit, which means that we stay even, more stable at this level. Of course, over the whole period of time, you can see that China transferred from net exporter of agriculture products, down to net importer. And recent years, more and more, importing to the feed grain import actually support the whole livestock industry in China. And the last part of things is about investment. I want to highlight all these three factors because later we are going to focus in the past, and so we are going to use of them. So different from the rest of other developing economies, public infrastructure investment played an important role in facilitating rural transformation, history of China. Now, taking example, even in the late 1980s, you can see a lot of money, put into the field actually to improve soil quality as well as watering, as well as irrigation system. That had played much of an important role to helping small scale farms, getting higher yield. And this is continues to contribute the past 40 years of rural transformation process. This is something actually which differ quite a lot from other developing countries. But also you can see that in recent years, money continues to go into the field, but marginal return actually declined a lot. Now take an example for irrigation system. Back to 80s and 70s, 2001 actually make into like one move of the land actually get about like 10% of yield growth. But recent years, double investment only yield like less than 1% or even less than 1% of the change in that direction. Okay, so what about the future path? To what extent we are going to put all this exercise into together to some forecasting? Like I mentioned just now, what I want to mention about the historical parts is trying to highlight one thing is that, at the crossroad, now China facing some slowdown pattern, in particular, the pressure from climate change. So in terms of that part of things, you can see that, within the whole analytical framework about rural transformation, two things are really missing. One is about to what extent inclusiveness or poverty reduction has been included. The second thing is about sustainability, in particular, how to increase the rural sector more resistant to climate change, maintaining this type of productivity growth persistent over time, right? Of course, a healthy agriculture sector and rural sector also can contribute to the rest of the whole economy, as we just mentioned. Now, if we're taking about this as the one of the first phase, which is past 40 years, you can see that agriculture industry itself grows, making it only accounting for 7.6% of the GDP, throughout the whole country, but it's still using more than 20% of the labor force, or even around 40% of the population is there, which means there is still a huge gap in terms of efficiency. That means that, in the near future, there are still like, about 200, million of the people that could be used for the rest of the economy, which is important driver for the, whole economic growth in the near future. But how to making them motivated, into the next sector and becoming a driving force of economic growth, that's an important question. Because you can't maintain small scale farm production dominant this sector and still again achieve such a type of productivity gain in the next 20 or 30 years. And of course, making better use of the technology progress. In particular, turn back this TFP growth rate down to the long-term pattern would be one of challenging tasks. Now, here, this is one of the interesting figure, which is, was produced by Wu back to 1970s. In that type of the picture, x-axis representing agricultural output per agriculture working unit versus, agricultural output, per hectare of the land. Now, initially, Hayami Wu trying to using this figure to tell you that different countries will take different paths. To make, achievement in agricultural development. Because he said that, like Japan or other Asian countries, because their lack of, land resources, they will take a path, first towards, the y-axis. But 20 or 30 years later, when IFPRI trying to reproduce this figure, last year in their new release book, they find most of the countries going into that direction. Right. An interesting phenomenon is that no matter whether you are abundant in land or not, most of the countries trying to making more investment in machinery and capital. Right. This is good news, also bad news. The bad news for energy economists is that using more capital or machineries may lead to more demanding of the fossil fuel or whatever things. Okay. Right. And of course, you can also look at this part of things which build up a positive correlation between capital labor ratio and total factor productivity, which highlights that most of the modern AI technologies and for digital type of things will be coming together with capital investment. So what China did right in the history was that putting a lot of public infrastructure, improve the per capita, capital equipment, helping productivity gain. But in the near future, actually, this strength is actually more important. But if you're thinking about the reality in China nowadays, still 85% of farms operating a small scale, less than 2 hectares of piece of land. How to make technology progress to be, how to say, future sustainable development driver is relying how we make investment. Interestingly, there are some new technologies and sharing economy making this happen more quickly. I give you one example, the quicker spread of zones, which is, very low cost type of things being widely used in China through customer service, getting access to each of the individual farmers, actually to some extent helping to improve the capital intensity throughout the whole economy, actually contribute to, the productivity gain, as well as, creating more of farm employment in the sector. I'll just stop here and leaving the rest for your discussion. Okay.
Let's move to our second speaker, Professor Xiaoli Zhao. Professor Zhao is Deputy Dean of the School of Economics and Management and Director of the Institute of Low Carbon Economy and Policy at the China University of Petroleum in Beijing. And she specializes in energy economics, environmental regulation, and renewable energy policies. She's going to talk about the mechanisms for inter-industrial collaboration in China's energy transformation. Over to you. Look forward.
Okay. Good morning, everyone. My topic includes 4 parts. The first is introduction to Nobel Prize winners in physics in 2021, and some other scientists pointing out that energy consumption lead to climate change. And some other scholars, such as IPCC report, indicates that fuel energy consumption has close relations with greenhouse gas emission. It contributes to about 80% of total greenhouse gas emissions. Meanwhile, energy transition has an important role in mitigating climate change, since renewable energy emit 0 greenhouse gas during its production. Well, the synergistic development among sectors plays an important role in energy transition, because if the issue of synergistic issue is ignored, it would lead to the phase out fossil fuels and large-scale development of renewable energy. Shortage, because we should pay attention that the old social technism system in energy system be compatible with the old one, should be the new system should be substituted by the old one in energy transition process. Secondly, the speed of phase out of fossil fuel energy should be compatible with the speed of renewable energy increase. If the synergistic development in energy transition, it would happen for shortage. In 2021, the power shortage occurred in 21 provinces in China, especially in northeastern 3 provinces in China. The power restrictions are residents occurred. On the other hand, if the synergistic development is ignored, it would lead to the issue of fair energy transition, such as it happened in United Kingdom coal industry and United States coal industries. Hence, it's important to realize the collaborative mechanisms among sectors in the process of large scale of renewable energy development in China. Second part is the development pathways of coupled PV energy storage and charging stations. The cases of distributed photovoltaic development on highways and railways shows that PV, ES, and CS has a big potential market in China. The red figure shows a simple scheme of coupled PV energy storage and charging stations. Currently, the studies about the coupled system exist. Some places need to be improved. The first one is that researchers haven't yet considered the environmental benefits. Second is that the comparison about economic and environmental effects of the coupled system among different locations is lack. Third, in the modeling process, it was frequently assumed that the number of charging piles was fixed. This table shows the current studies about the coupled system. Our study analyzed the economic and the environmental benefits of the coupled system in 7 different locations in China, including residence, hospital, hotel, and so on. We discussed the influence of decrease of energy storage cost and the increase of peak valley difference of electricity price on the economic and the environmental benefits of the coupled system. Our objective function is maximum NPV. The model of NPV includes 2 parts. First one is the income that is from supporting electricity. The second big part includes PV equipment investment, energy storage investment, and charging stations infrastructure control costs. There are some constraint conditions. 3 key steps are included. The first is forecasting distributed EV power generation in Beijing. Second, predicting power consumption load profiles across different locations. Third is to forecast electric vehicle charging load demand. These are our simulation result of solar radiation. It is shown that our predict result, the pink lines, is similar with that the actual data represented by the blue line. This is a typical power load for different types of users. 7 different types of users are analyzed. This is our prediction of charging load in different locations. The blue line represents our predictive result, and the histogram is actual data. It also shows that our result, our anticipated result, is basically consistent with the actual data. This is our result of economic benefit of the coupled system in different locations. It is shown that the coupled system nearby hospital has the best economic benefits, and then shopping mall, and then the third one is teaching building. The last one is located nearby residence. These are our environmental benefits of the coupled system in different locations. Similar with the result of economic benefits. The first one is also the hospital. The last one is also the residence. This figure shows that with the decrease of energy storage cost, carbon emission and economic benefit, carbon emission reduction and economic benefit increase quickly. That means energy storage cost decrease is very important for get the environmental and economic benefits of such coupled system. This is the result of power price peak valley difference change. The increase of power price peak valley difference increase has little impact on CO2 emission reduction, but it contributes to the improvement of economic ROI benefits with the difference increase. These are our conclusion and policy implications.
About 5 minutes.
Okay. The third part is synergistic development between heating system decarbonization and renewable energy increase. The red figure shows that in China, the energy structure, the coal consumption dominated, but in Beijing, the dominated energy is become natural gas, and the coal consumption only accounting for 1% in Beijing's energy consumption. The left figure shows that Beijing's local power supply structure, the renewable energy, green, wind, yellow, solar contribute for very little proportion of the total energy consumption in Beijing. Beijing's energy flow diagram in 2020 showed that the final energy consumption include three sectors: heating demand, transport demand, and electricity demand. Hence, it is important to analyze the synergistic development between heating demand and renewable energy. We set up three scenarios to analyze this issue. First is business as usual. The second is electricity substitution scenario. That means heat pump technology to replace gas heating. The third one is the synergistic development scenario. That is, renewable energy electricity is stored and released through low temperature molten salt pulse. Energy plan model is used because energy plan model can analyze the hourly balance between power supply and demand. This is our result. Again, the difference between the actual data and our simulated result is little. This is our simulation result. It is shown that in the scenario of synergistic development, renewable energy share in Beijing in 2050 can reach nearly 100%. And the carbon emissions accordingly reduce very quickly. And in the scenario of synergistic development, the PV capacity increased, the pink line increased very quickly. And it is very important that in the scenario of synergistic development, the cost is not the highest. The electricity substitution scenario. In this scenario, the cost is the highest because with the scale increase of substitution, the heat pump investment cost increase quickly. Our conclusion is that 100% of local renewable electricity and heating needs can be realized if synergistic development is realized. And accordingly, the greatest carbon emissions reduction effect can be realized also. We also provide some policy implications. Last part is future research prospect. We put forward like horizontal synergistic development, vertical, spatial, temporal, technological, and institutional synergistic development maybe should be studied in the future. That's all. Thank you.
Very, very informative and many times perfectly. Let's move to our third speaker, Professor Shanjun Li. Professor Li is a professor of economic and policy from Cornell University. His research include environment and energy economics, and also Chinese economy. Particularly, he serves as director of the Cornell Institute for China Economic Research. So today, he's going to talk about global diffusion of EVs, policy and impacts. Over to you, please.
All right, thanks so much, Larry, for the very nice introduction. And I would like to thank Professor Song and Professor Zhao for the invitation to be here. And it's really a great learning experience so far for me. It's also great to meet some friends, old and new. I'm coming from the part of New York, which it's actually had snow before I come here. So it's great to escape from sub-zero temperature as well. So I would like to spend a few minutes first to give you a quick overview on global EV diffusion. We talked a lot about transportation and electrification yesterday, which is really key part of energy transition. And then I'll move on to the policies that have been used, and then talk about the impacts and lessons that we can draw from during the last decade of this technology. So this shows the goals set out by different governments across the world in terms of zero emission vehicles. So now, this is basically electric vehicles only. And for example, Norway, the Norwegian government set a goal of reaching 100% of EVs, ZEVs by 2025, right? That's quite ambitious. But if you look at the dark line there, that's the historical path of EV shares in Norway. And last year, it was about 90%. So they are really on their way to achieve 100% ZEV, right? 100% zero emission vehicles. If you look at other countries in Europe, it's roughly between 20 to 40% last year. Now, I added Australia just yesterday, just to show you that Australian government has set a goal of reaching 60% by 2030. But that's really, now if you look at the market share last year, it's quite far, right? So it's less than 10%. That actually tracks the United States very well. The Biden administration set a goal of reaching 50% by 2030. Last year, the market share was also below 10%. Now, China here is quite really interesting. Chinese government set a goal of reaching 20% by 2025 here, right? A few years back. But last year, the market share of EVs reached almost 40%. So they have really surpassed their goal set out a few years ago. And when I talked to my friends in the auto industry a few days ago, they told me this year, the market share of EVs in China will likely be around 50%, right? I didn't put the figures for Japan. Actually, in Japan, the market share is very low. So there's a big variation across the world. And so you might ask, why such a big variation across different countries in terms of adoption pattern? We'll come back to that in a little bit. Now, this shows the sales, the gross sales in 3 different regions: Europe in red, US green, and China in blue. You can see that China is by far the largest EV market, accounting for actually about 50% of global EV sales in the past few years. In terms of the share of EVs globally, I want to find a pointer. I don't know, is this a good pointer? Yeah, okay. This is, the last year, the global share was 18.5%. Again, there's a huge variation across countries. In terms of charging stations, this is really crucial. Professor Zhao just mentioned about charging stations in Beijing. Here, this shows the number of charging stations in different regions of the world: China in red, Europe, the United States, and the rest of the world. Now, if you look at fast chargers, these are chargers, they can charge EVs at a faster speed. China actually accounts for 80% of global fast chargers. They account for about 50% of slow chargers. So China has built up really dramatic or very expensive charging network relative to other countries. And that's actually part of the reason, part of the driver, one of the key drivers behind China's rapid diffusion of electric vehicles. Now, again, this shows the number of EV models across countries. You can see China has by far the most EV models available to consumers. There are still more gasoline models in China, but the number of EV models not that far behind in China, right? If you look at Norway, there's a lot more models, and that's also consistent with the high market share there. The United States is actually quite low in terms of the number of EV models available to consumers. This is top 10 EV firms in 2020 last year. So BYD is by far the largest one. A lot of these firms have actually presence. They have joint ventures. Tesla has a big plant in China. These firms actually have joint ventures, all of them actually in China. That's actually explained why they are top 10 EV firms in the world. And this is a Chinese firm. if you look at actually top 20 firms, between 10 and 20, most of the firms actually are Chinese EV firms, or Chinese automakers. Okay, so battery is the most important component of EVs, and they account for about 30 to 40% in terms the cost of EV production. This figure shows the top 6 battery producers in the world. 2 of them are from China, Panasonic and AESC are from Japan, LG, Samsung from South Korea. These top 6 firms accounted for about 75% of global battery supplies during the last decade also. And CATL from China is now the largest battery producer. This shows the battery supply network. On the left-hand side, there are the top 6 battery suppliers, and there are about 40 other smaller battery producers. These are the top 8 EV producers, and there are about 40 other major EV producers as well. This shows the supply relationship is quite complicated, but with some kind of interesting cases where BYD actually is vertically integrated firm, which means BYD only produce battery for itself. It only also buy battery from itself, right? AESC, this Japanese battery producer, sell only to Renault, Nissan, Mitsubishi alliance, but this alliance actually needs more battery than what AESC supplies, so they are buying from other firms. Tesla has been diversifying their supply chain, buying mostly from, used to buy mostly from Panasonic, but they started to source from CATL and LG as well in the last few years. This shows the better supply chain from Bloomberg New Energy Finance. You can see the role, the dominant role of China in all the different components of battery, from cathode, anode, electrode, and except the mineral refining. Okay. So this is really a quick overview of global EV diffusion. Now, I would like to spend more time here to talk about the major policy used, and then try to understand why there's the big variation across countries in terms of EV diffusion, and also talk about the policy impacts and lessons. Now, I want to focus on two types of policies. The first one is consumer purchase subsidies. This is really the most dominant policy tool that has been used by countries across the world. And then there are these emerging set of policies. I call them domestic production promoting policies. And let's talk about what these policies mean for global EV adoption or diffusion. So this is from one of my papers where we collect data on subsidies. There are different types of subsidies, different types of incentives, including financial incentives and non-financial incentives across top 13 EV countries. These are the major EV markets that accounted for about 95% of global EV sales in the past decade. So a lot of policies have been used. Let's look at the consumer subsidies in China. Over time, the unit subsidy per EV has been declining, actually phased out by the end of 2022 in China. This is Europe, this is the United States. But in 2023, the United States actually restarted the subsidy program that provides up to $7,500 per EV from Biden's Inflation Reduction Act. Okay. And this is from another study of mine, which shows the subsidies in China. It has this from central government. It has a very interesting feature. First of all, it's stepwise. You can see the amount of subsidy is a function of the driving range. If your vehicle has a longer driving range, you get more subsidy in this stepwise function. But over time, the subsidy has reduced and phased out eventually in 2022. So this policy actually had some really interesting impacts on the kind of EVs that were produced or that were sold in China. So this figure shows our simulation results from a model that illustrate the role of consumer subsidies for these 13 countries that I mentioned. The top line is basically observed sales, and then this green line here is the sales when we remove the consumer subsidy. This basically tells us that consumer subsidies across really the major EV markets explained about 40% of global EV sales during the past decade, right? There are other lines here that look at learning by doing in the industry, which turns out to be extremely important as well, but I'll skip that in the interest of time. And I'm going to show you a couple tables. These are the results from our model that shows the impacts of subsidies in different countries. For example, this table shows the impacts of US subsidies during this time period across the world. In China, the impact of the US subsidies in China on European countries, Japan, South Korea. Of course, this is for North America, and this is the global impact. And the way we measure the impact here is to look at social welfare, which is a sum of consumer welfare, battery firm profit, EV profits, because we are looking at subsidies, so we are going to net out the government expenditure as well, right? First of all, I want to show you that the total amount of subsidy during this period in the US was about $9 billion. It actually led to a very big increase in consumer surplus, also benefit the EV firms because there was no battery producer in the US, so this is zero. But this, we also net out the government expenditure. Sorry, I actually, did I say this is, no, the government subsidy actually was $13 billion. The total welfare gain is about $9 billion, right? So this number, these two numbers, the sum of these two minus the government expenditure. Sorry for the confusion there. Now, I want to show you actually this spillover effects from the subsidies in the US. It actually benefited the battery producers in Japan and South Korea because the cars sold in North America actually source mostly batteries from Japan and South Korea. So when you subsidize EV sales in North America, you are going to benefit battery producers in Japan and South Korea. And through this linkage, through supply chain linkage, the US subsidy actually also benefit European countries quite a bit. The reason is that cars sold in Europe also source mostly from Japan and South Korea battery producers, right? There's an important learning by doing that I'm not showing you here is that when there are more EVs, as a result, more batteries sold, the battery production quantity increase, that will lead to learning by doing, lead to cost reduction in batteries, therefore lead to lower battery prices and EV prices. That's going to benefit countries other than the subsidy country. So it shows the spillover effects of subsidies from one country to another, or to another region. If you look at the spillover benefit to China, that's really relatively minor because there is a smaller or limited overlap in the battery supply chain. Okay, essentially Chinese vehicle producers do not source much from South Korea and Japanese battery producers. Okay, now this table shows the impacts of Chinese subsidies during this data period. The big increase in social welfare, big spending, of course, over $21 billion. And it has a limited benefit to Japan and South Korea, as I mentioned, because the vehicles sold in China mostly sourced domestically in terms of the batteries, right? There is a limited spillover to Europe and North America. Okay. All right, so let me turn to the second type policy, domestic production promoting policy here. And these are really preferential treatment of domestic battery suppliers. Give you one example. The first one is China's wireless policy in 2016 between, 1 minute. Okay, 2016, 2019. I'm going to show you what happened to that policy. Okay, this is the US. I'm going to skip. So this is during the China's wireless policy period. And the sales of BYD CATL increased really fast during this period. And actually, in fact, they surpassed these other major competitors during the policy period. Okay? And this graph shows the share of EV models sold in China sourced from batteries in China. The wireless policy essentially is a policy that limit or that provides subsidy to EVs only if that EV source battery from Chinese battery supplier. Okay, it's a domestic content requirement essentially. So that lead to increase of Chinese EV models buying batteries domestically. Interestingly, after the policy was scrapped, actually the share of EV models sold elsewhere in the world, in US, in Europe, also increased their sourcing from Chinese battery suppliers. Because this time period, this policy actually lead to fast learning by doing among Chinese EV producers, actually gave them a cost comparative advantage even after the policy was scrapped. Okay. Now this, I skip that. I just want to mention the impact of that policies, but I didn't have time to talk about the recent U.S. Inflation Reduction Act bipartisan infrastructure bill. You know, there's a lot of money going into climate change efforts, and these policies actually have important domestic content requirements, very much like the China's Wiley's policy. The goal is to encourage production to happen in North America. So I call them, these are really industry and trade policies with protectionism for different reasons, and this could potentially lead to a racing to bottom. And this is really some of we are doing research in this area, try to understand the impacts of these industry trade policies on global EV diffusion. So with that, let me stop there. Thanks so much.
Please ask a question to Professor Sheng. I remember you showed a graph that Chinese agricultural productivity, total productivity TFE, increased historically significantly 2.6% annually. I was wondering, can I please ask you a little bit forward-looking, especially given the consideration of the temperature will increase by maybe 2 or 3 degrees Celsius to the end of the century, how do you think the productivity will change? Thank you.
Yeah, go ahead, please.
Thank you for your question. So the current estimation, I mean, for the total factor productivity is based on the traditional new classical type of way, which is only considered about economic output, including both crop, livestock, and other agriculture outputs, dividing the total inputs, which is including land, labor, capital, material, and services. Your question is right on the target because most of them in the current existing type of methodology only consider about the economic input and output. So omitted this type of climate impact as well as other non-market type of factors, like even what I mentioned there about the soil degradation and other type of things. So there are some of the efforts starting from like 10 years ago that OECD trying to produce a new measurement system, which is called about environmental adjusted, total factor productivity, which is trying to incorporate this climate, like including rainfall temperature change as one type of non-market type of inputs, so that to adjust this type of TFP growth. The purpose is not only technically address this type of inputs, but also trying to consider quite a lot of public R&D, which is gradually shifting the focus towards dealing with this climate change type of issues. So there is a lot of literature trying to actually put into these areas, trying to see that whether when people trying to bring this type of climate change and other type of non-market factor into the system, whether this type of slowdown in terms of productivity trend will be fixed, right? But the answer to this question actually is lying two folds. Number one is that, most of existing studies, shows that the impact on yield is definitely, can be reflected. But in terms of total factor productivity, it also depends on whether farmers can adapt to the situation by taking, more, advanced technology, including like a breeding improvement as well as, digital technology. So there is uncertain, which is, when you put it in, probably it goes up more quicker. Yeah.
Thank you. The next question, Li Gang, and then.
Thank you very much. A question for Sheng is that you have a chart which actually have this log TFP against the capital labor ratio. All the countries are trending up, but US is actually trending down. Why that is the case? A question for Shanjun. Very interesting presentation, very informative, and very interesting observation about the spillover of a country providing subsidies actually have international spillover. But China's spillover is very little. That's why other countries complain about the subsidies of China. So is there any way in thinking about a more creative way for China to actually adjust to be able to have a more spillover impact on other countries? So therefore, we can have a win-win situation, serve the purpose of climate change, but at the same time, less problem with the trading, protectionism and everything. So that's the question. Xiaoli is basically it's a comment. Very interesting to see Beijing already phased out the use of coal. That's great, only 1%. So the question is that whether other countries, other cities, can quickly follow the model of Beijing to phase out use of coal. I know overall now it's 55% of coal use, already reduced more than 10% percentage point of the energy composition. So already make a great progress being made, but China can quickly quicken that pace to reduce the coal use. Thanks.
Well, I enjoyed all three presentations.
Probably better for them to answer
But I particularly like Professor Shanjun's presentation, partly because I cite quite a bit from your studies in my own presentation. I'm not an expert on the EVs, but I do engage in discussion quite a lot. And I think you're finding that the Chinese state subsidy, narrowly defined, is not really a big issue. This is very powerful. But the US officials in discussion with us, they mentioned two things. One is the state subsidy, the other is state direction. What do you think of the role of state direction in this dramatic rise of the EV industry in China?
Probably a quick follow-up. But first of all, Shanjun, you mentioned the spillover effect. My question is that whether you concede whether China subsidize the reduced cost of the battery vehicle, and that create actually probably spillover effect for other countries. It's indirect. I'm not sure whether that factor can be considered. More like R&D or whatever subsidy contribute to the lower cost for electric vehicle and benefit the other country. I think Xiaoli's question is that Beijing actually import a lot of electric from Inner Mongolia. So when you're talking about Beijing reach the 100% renewable, whether you can consider import from there. And quick for Sheng is that when we talk about rural productivity, my observation is that larger people resisting village, like my parents leaving, but actually they are a lot working there. Now they don't need actually labor, it's all machine operating and even like a drone for the irrigation. So quickly for this. Thank you.
We start.
Let's respond to this the customer for the first round.
Okay. Thank you for these questions. So in terms of the spillovers, I think that's really interesting finding we thought is that the subsidies from one country has international positive spillovers, but the extent of spillover critically hinges on the extent of overlap in battery supply chain. So that means if China and the US or Europe has a really big overlap of the supply chain in terms of who they buy the batteries from and other auto parts too, then the spillovers will be bigger, right? So the fact that the Chinese subsidy has a smaller spillover is not a fault of Chinese policy or Chinese automaker per se, rather it's just a fact, it's a result from the fact that the US or European car makers, they are not sourcing a lot of batteries from Chinese firms. Or another way is the Chinese automakers are not sourcing batteries from South Korea or Japanese firms, right? So it's both sides of the coin. So the point we want to actually make in that paper, we're still working on that, is to thinking about in a world of autarky. We think that the world is going there. Every country wants their own battery production. They want to only source from their domestic production. What's going to happen is actually you are going to see a smaller and even smaller spillovers, right? So that's the point we want to make. So in terms of Professor Huang's comments, we actually agree. I personally agree that the subsidies, if you look at the subsidy amount or subsidy per unit of EV from the central government, is very similar across countries, right? So the fact that EU is imposing the tariff based on the subsidies is actually mostly not about the central government subsidies, rather other ways of subsidizing all EV production in terms, free, low cost land, low cost financing, or other type of incentives. Right. So I think I should stop here and let you guys.
Okay, thank you for those and his professor's questions. Yes, we take the study as Beijing as an example because we only get the data of Beijing's energy supply and consumption. It is provided by Beijing's electricity per company. It's difficult to get the similar data from other provinces, maybe from other countries. But I think the principle of the synergistic development between inter-industries is helpful to promote renewable energy. This principle is right, whatever in which provinces or in which countries. And we take Beijing as an example to give a quantitatively result to make the result. It can be realized that renewable energy can substitute coal. It can be realized rarely. But we try our best to get more data in other places to make deeper analysis about this question to expand the result. Thank you.
All right, so for your question, Professor Song, the first point is that, in terms of capital investment, so most of the OECD countries has already achieved all stage of the mechanization, full mechanization till 1986. So reflecting in the figure itself, for the United States throughout, after mid-1990s, the mechanization type of investment actually declining. So that's the reason why, you can see in terms of the data, actually, US slowed down. My personal explanation on this type of the situation is because historically, they have built up huge amount of capital stock. Because of the high interest rate and then later in the 1990s, causing actually the farmers hesitate, to make the investment. But if you look at the further, recent data, which is updated after 2015 and so on, so forth, so you can see that US investment also picking up. This is also partly because of, quickly rising of customer service in the United States. If you look at the ARMS survey, which is covered all nationwide of the US, you can see today the herring machines actually accounting for 26% of total intermediate inputs in the United States, which means that this round of investment is not focused on each individual farms, but actually as a whole industry as itself, the investment goes in. This is similar as what happens in China and the rest of other places.
Yeah, okay. I was thinking whether there's a diminished return to capital.
Well,
a very high capital labor ratio.
Yeah,
that's the case for the US.
In history, yes, if the pattern is followed, each individual farmers making the investment, that will happen in this way. But like I mentioned to you that, the recent 10 years, a decade also, the investment actually that the industry as a whole, which means the service provider buys the machine and run it out to individual farmers. This is not only just happened within developing countries, but also in a lot of OECD countries happen quickly. Okay, yeah. So my answer, to Xunpeng's question is that depending on which, statistic level you are looking at, So even you just looking at ILO definition of labor force type of, definition, between 15 and 60, this is the range. Now in China agriculture sector, which is accounting for 17.9% of labor usually. So what do you observe also, of course, the aging population is a very big problem. But if you look at the total number of farms in China, as well as the labor use in agriculture production in rural statistics, you can still that this labor percentage, which is defined on the standard type of criteria, is still more than 3 times of the GDP per capita. So which is GDP proportion. So which is still overuse of the labor. If you look at, for example, like Australian's case, 2.1% of the GDP per proportion of agriculture in total, which only account for less than 2% of employment. But if you go further, rural labor force, which is defined by China Bureau of Statistics, this proportion by head count, which is more than 30%. Which is pretty much we show on the figure. If you look at the residents, which what you said, the local system registration is 42%. So it's even higher. That's the answer.
All right, thanks to all speakers. We ran out of time too much for the session, so probably I'm sure there are still a lot of interest that we'll talk about after the morning tea. So please join me to thank the speakers for this.